All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea in economics that's all about timing. It turns out it's not just what we buy, but when we buy it that can literally shape the economic fate of an entire country. The big idea is called intertemporal prices, and we're drawing on some great work here from Carlos Vague and Alberto Ortiz. And to get our heads around this, let's start with a question you've definitely asked yourself before.
You know the feeling, right? You see that sign, sale ends Sunday, and all of a sudden, that thing you were just kind of looking at feels like a must-have. Well, that little bit of pressure, that urge to act now because you know the price is going to go up, that's a fundamental part of how we're wired.
But here's where it gets really interesting. That same impulse, it doesn't just work on you and me. It scales up big time. Governments can actually create something like a limited time offer for an entire nation. And when they do, it can trigger economic booms, create massive deficits, and basically change the whole economic story of a country. All right, so how does a simple sale manage to shake up a whole economy? Well, first we've got to get a handle on the core concept here, which is all about prices across time. Okay, so this is the big one, the intertemporal price. And it sounds complicated, but all it really means is the price of buying something today compared to buying it in the future. It's all about that trade-off. You see, when a government announces a temporary policy, they're basically making it way cheaper to consume right now. And that creates this huge incentive for pretty much everyone to do their spending sooner rather than later. So let's put this idea into action. What happens when a government basically puts the entire country on sale? We're going to look at a classic example, a temporary cut on import tariffs. Think of it as a nationwide, for a limited time only deal. Okay, so here's what that looks like on a graph. See that? Right at time zero, the tariff just plummets. Bam, the sale is on. But, and this is the most important part, everybody knows it's not going to last. At time t, that price cut is gone, and the tariffs snap right back to where they were. The clock is officially ticking.
So what do people do? Well, the reaction is exactly what you'd expect, and it's fast. Just look at this consumption graph. It shoots up, creating this big plateau of spending that lasts for the exact same amount of time as the tariff cut. From time zero to time t, it's basically a national shopping spree.
And all that shopping, it has a huge impact on the country's finances, because with everyone buying up imported goods, the country's total spending just blows past its income. And you can see it right here in the trade balance. It just dives deep into a deficit for as long as that sale is on. The country is literally borrowing from its own future to pay for the party today. So let's boil this all down. The key takeaway here is that because the policy is temporary, it makes people substitute. They choose to consume now instead of later. They're just trying to get in on the deal before prices go back up. And the result? You get this short, intense economic boom, but it comes at the cost of a big trade deficit. Okay, but all this talk about a temporary sale leads to a really big question. What if it wasn't temporary? What happens if those low prices are here to stay? Well, that's a completely different story, and it shows just how differently the economy reacts to a permanent change. So check this out. Here are the two scenarios right next to each other. On the left, you've got that crazy temporary spike in spending we just talked about. But look over on the right. When the cut is permanent, there's no spike at all. Instead, consumption just smoothly rises to a new, higher level and stays there. It's stable. So what gives? Why such a massive difference in how people react? It's because the entire logic of the situation changes. See, a permanent cut in tariffs isn't just a temporary sale, it actually makes the whole country richer over the long haul. Why? Because the economy becomes more efficient, so there's no deadline, there's no rush to beat the clock. People just feel, well, permanently a little bit richer, and so they adjust their spending habits for good, not just for a weekend. Okay, so these two very different results, the short-term boom versus the long-term rise, they happen because of two powerful economic forces that are constantly pulling against each other. So on one side, you have the intertemporal substitution effect. Just think of this as the limited time offer effect. It's the one that makes you shift your spending around in time to get the best deal. That's the force that causes the temporary boom. And on the other side, you have the wealth effect. This is what takes over when a change feels permanent. People feel genuinely wealthier, so they don't need to rush. They just smooth out their consumption at a new, higher level forever. No drama. And this is really why this whole framework is so important. Once you understand this constant tug of war between substitution and wealth, you suddenly have this amazing lens to understand all sorts of economic events, way beyond just tariffs. Like, think about temporary tax cuts. They can cause that same kind of short-term spending frenzy for the exact same reason. Or what about terms of trade shocks? That's just a fancy way of saying a country's exports suddenly become way more valuable. Imagine an oil country when oil prices spike for a few months. Same thing. You often see a big consumption boom. But maybe the biggest lesson here is about credibility. Because if a government says a change is permanent but nobody believes them, guess what? People will act like it's temporary, and you'll get that boom and bust cycle all over again. Belief is everything. And we're not just talking theory here. The evidence for that long-term wealth effect is actually really strong. You can look at studies from Mexico, Chile, Colombia. They all point to the same thing. When countries commit to permanent trade liberalization, you see real, lasting gains in productivity. The economy just gets better at what it does. That is the wealth effect, right there in the real world, creating actual, sustainable prosperity. And this really brings us to a quote from the source material that just nails the whole challenge for policymakers. When it talks about intertemporal distortion, that's just the fancy term for that crazy boom and bust cycle we saw, the one driven by everyone trying to time the market. So for any policy to actually make people better off in the long run, that permanent wealth effect has to be more powerful than the temporary, distorting substitution effect. Which leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? If the only thing standing between a chaotic short-term boom and real, lasting prosperity is a government's promise, then how much is that promise really worth?